welcome to another episode of Luminaries in Structural Heart. I'm your host for this episode, Jessica Kiszka, a nurse practitioner, previous valve program coordinator, and now in medical affairs with medical education at Medtronic Structural Heart. I am pleased to introduce my friend and colleague, Sarah Kennedy. Sarah, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Sarah Kennedy. I'm a nurse practitioner and valve clinic coordinator at Centera in Norfolk, Virginia. I've been in this role about 10 years now. Like you, I started cardiothoracic surgery ICU when TAVR was just coming through, and now I'm on the other side of it, on the cardiology side. So it's been fun to see the evolution of TAVR, and thank you for having me.
Yeah. And in this episode, we're going to dive into post-procedure management. So TAVR has come a long way since the high-risk trials.
Yeah.
Let's take us to the place where your patient just had the procedure done. They're wheeling out of the cath lab or the hybrid OR. Where do your patients go?
Yeah, so initially, and I remember, prior to 2020, all of these patients went to the ICU, right? They were higher risk, all the comorbidities. But now TAVR is so streamlined, percutaneous, low risk. Our patients go to basically a 24-hour PACU kind of situation. They go to a care unit where we recover our PCIs and our other structural procedures, spend about an hour there, eat, drink, make sure hemodynamics are stable, and then they'll go usually to a hallway next door with a planned discharge the following day. Or if they are going to need maybe a 48-hour stay, we'll send them up to an intermediate care unit.
Okay. So your patients up and walking that night?
Absolutely.
So let's talk about the order sets for these patients. We started off in the cardiac ICU. Are these patients getting cardine drips? Are they getting sedatives and IV pain meds? What's your typical order set look like?
Yeah, so first off, I like everything to be easy, right? So we build a fast track TAVR set, we label it that way, so there's no confusion. These are not ICU patients anymore, and they really shouldn't be treated like them. Most medications are oral medications. I will have a cardine drip, ordered if I think the patient's gonna need it, but most of the time it's just PO, hydralazine, PRN, and I'll resume their oral medicines from home. I usually do kind of hold off on the AV nodal blocking agents immediately post-op, but then I'll resume those. The order sets are kind of streamlined for the nurses. They have the orders for sheath removals and, up in 2 to 4 hours, no Foley catheters, no central lines if we can avoid them. But I try to keep them off the drips, up, awake, and eating as quick as possible.
And your fast track order sets, are those in your EMR?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep, everything's checked. It gives the nurses the autonomy they deserve to take care of the patients, and then they call us if they have any questions or if there's a unique situation. We'll add a couple extra order sets, but most of the time, these patients are very streamlined.
Now, let's look at medication management beyond blood pressure and vital signs. What about your antiplatelet regimen for your TAVR patients? What has the evidence showed us, or what do you normally give?
Yeah, so that's a good question, and I think we're all kind of still learning what best practice is for this. Right now, our preferred mode is single antiplatelet therapy. So if the patient can tolerate 6 months of Plavix, we'll put them on 6 months of Plavix, and then we'll say aspirin indefinitely.
Aspirin indefinitely. 81?
81,
Okay.
Usually. We tell them if you miss a dose, it's not a big deal, but we like aspirin indefinitely. If they have a history of a stroke or a second indication for dual antiplatelet therapy, then we'll usually continue that. Prior stent, stroke, significant peripheral arterial disease, something like that. And then if they are on anticoagulation, then we'll usually just continue monotherapy for that. So we'll usually put them on aspirin and Plavix while they're inpatient, and then transition them back to their Coumadin or their DOAC at discharge.
So a patient has a history of paroxysmal AFib, elevated CHA2-VASc. When they go home, they're just on their anticoagulant.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
All right, so beyond the medication management of your patients, what are the things that you watch out for in the post-procedure setting? I love how you set the stage for TAVR, is it, a next day or single day procedure, but what are the things that you or your team is thinking about for a differential diagnosis?
Yeah, so this is really important because you really have to educate the nurses that are taking care of these patients post-op. You have to educate the on-call teams that may get these calls regarding these complications. And the major ones that we look out for, the first one is probably vascular complications. We use pretty big sheaths. And whether you're going radial for your second access, whether you're doing a double stick on one side, or whether you're doing both groins, complications can occur. And whether you're closing it, the access with a device, or if it's just pressure, all of that's important. So the first thing we look for is a groin complication, a hematoma, any kind of bleed that may prolong the patient's bed rest or may prolong the patient staying in the hospital. And those can be kind of silent. So that's probably number one. The second thing is arrhythmias. So we know with TAVR, you know, there can be increased evidence of new left bundle branch blocks, and usually they don't progress, but occasionally they do. So you need to watch out for arrhythmias, you know, that AFib, that's actually complete heart block, and does the patient have a temporary wire? Are they safe to go to the floor? Are they safe to ambulate? Is the dizziness that they're having because they've been NPO all day, because they're dehydrated and they're getting their TAVR at 4 p.m., or are they having some kind of underlying new arrhythmia? So that's probably the second one. The third one would be something intrinsic, like a pericardial effusion. If the patient's hypotensive, of unclear etiology, we'll usually do kind of a stat echo or a bedside ultrasound just to rule out pericardial effusion at the bedside. Very rare, but it's emergent, and you don't want it to happen at 8 o'clock at night when everyone's gone home. So we're probably pretty conservative about that. If we have any questions, we'll just do a bedside ultrasound before we're done for the day.
And you mentioned arrhythmias and heart blocks, and I think that's one of the biggest discussions post-TAVR.
Yeah.
What did you learn from the Optimized Pro clinical trial, and what pathway do you use at Sentara for these patients?
Yeah, so I think that's probably the number one space where we're still learning in TAVR, because I know in practice we have 50% of the patients we're going to say you have an elevated risk of pacemaker. You have a chronic right bundle coming into the TAVR. There's a chance you're going to need a pacemaker.
And that's at baseline, right?
At baseline.
Okay.
And then they go home and don't need one, right?
Okay.
And then you have the patient that comes in with no underlying arrhythmia and they get a pacer. So there's a lot that goes into this that we still don't know, right? So Optimized Pro taught us a lot, and it significantly reduced pacemaker rates just with the implant technique of custom overlap with the valve, okay? And I think we've carried that implant technique into how we do other TAVR valves as well, which is incredible, okay? And how we look at depth is important. So I think that's been a huge change in the TAVR world, for sure, decreasing that pacemaker rate. At Sentara, we do kind of best practice, obviously, but we also do a little bit, one more step. We do what's called an atrial pacing trial. And the way we look at it is it's kind of a stress test for the heart. So with that temporary pacing wire, we'll usually just move it down to the atrium and pace at 110, 120, just to try to stress the heart to see if they have any arrhythmias. If they have a new left bundle and they don't have any kind of heart block or dropped beats, then we'll usually pull the pacer and we'll feel better about sending them out without a wire. So that's usually what we do at Sentara.
So the Optimized Pro clinical data, you incorporated that into the procedure?
Absolutely.
So every time your implanters will make sure you have cusp overlap technique?
Yeah.
And then it carries over into the depth of implant, you said?
100%. Yep.
And it's resulted in, would you say your pacer rates are single digit or double digit?
Single digits, absolutely.
Okay.
They absolutely started double digit, okay? And I think most people can relate to that. But now they're single digit. We feel really comfortable sending patients home on monitors, and 90% of the time these bundles that occur don't result in any problems. But it's something we're still learning and we're still watching, and there's a lot of research that still needs to be done.
And so now you walked us through, from the provider's perspective, how you get patients in and out of the procedure safely with best practices and home ideally that next day. What are the discussions leading up to this to set expectations with both the patient, the family, and then maybe tell us a little bit more about the education you provided to the other ancillary hospital staff, like the nurses, to get them to understand that, yes, it's not a cardiac surgery patient?
Yes. So there's no better phrase than TAVR is a team sport, right? It takes everyone, invested in these patients to get them through safely, get them through quickly, including the patient and their family members. So we've kind of started by, when we have that initial consultation, we provide them with a folder regarding the procedure details, the expectations, even the discharge kind of instructions, so that they can review for that and they can plan on that and they can expect to go home that first day,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
Because, patients, when they hear they're having a heart valve replacement, it's nerve-wracking.
Yeah.
Understandably, it's nerve-wracking. And, sometimes they're not quite ready to go home. So we prepare them to have that support system ready for them. And then the same thing with the nursing staff and the ancillary staff. We went from a model where these patients were all recovered in the ICU. They all had A-lines. They all had Foley catheters. They wouldn't get out of bed. And now if I see a TAVR patient in bed at the end of the day, I'm like, what is going on? You got to get this patient up. You got to get them moving.
Yep.
Because we know that's how they get home and they feel better quicker. So I think you just spend time with every member of the team. You support every member of the team, constant check-ons, making sure everyone's feeling supported, making sure they have the education that they need to get these patients home quickly. And then it's important to make sure that the patients have an outlet or feel supported once they go home.
That's a great point.
So,
Yeah.
we always provide our number and we tell them, there's one of us on 24/7.
Yeah.
Okay. So even if you go home today, if you're not feeling well tonight, you call, someone will care for you. I also tell them that, our clinic, yes, we're always full, but we will always fit you in.
Okay.
So if you're having a problem, you call our nurses, we'll double book, we'll get you in, we'll take a look at the groin, we'll get you on a monitor if we're worried. So just having that kind of support system built in on the back end, I think helps us get patients home quicker.
That's a great point about bridging the gap for those patients that maybe are scared to go home the next day. I remember some that were running out the door and others
Yes.
that are just, a little more hesitant.
Yes.
So when you give them the phone number, is it your structural office?
It is.
Okay.
Yeah, it's our
Okay.
structural office, and we're there 7 to 5, but then 7 to 5, but there's always an on-call person
Yeah,
for us as
of
well.
course.
So it's helpful.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you use mechanisms like that, and then you set event monitors. Those kind of help bridge some of those gaps just to still get the patients home, but
Yes.
have ways to monitor things in case there's, any concerns or new heart blocks.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so we're very conservative at Sentara, I would say, about sending patients home with monitors. We probably send 50% of our patients home with event monitors. And if you think about it, there's a fair amount that already have pacemakers, so
Yeah.
it's a pretty high amount. But for us, it's something very minor that we track. But it is a safety net for the patient. It's a safety net for us. And patients, I think, just feel more comfortable going home knowing that if they have a problem, they can call us. We can look real time, see what's going on. Yeah.
Anything else you want to add about the post-procedure care of your patients and your heart team?
Yeah, I would just say, this field has evolved tremendously in the past 10 years. And I think every institution does it a little bit differently for solid reasons, right? Whether it's the infrastructure that's in place, whether it's the resources that are in place, whether it's patients that are traveling from 4 hours away to come get their TAVR. So there's not one way to do it right. But I would say, embrace the change and embrace that this is now a kind of percutaneous procedure. Patients can go home the next day safely, and just make small steps. If you're trying to figure out what steps to make, just make small steps. Reach out to your fellow colleagues, and no need to kind of reinvent the wheel.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having
we
me.
look forward to having you again in the future. Thank you.
Thanks, Jess.